sounds horrible. Hello? That sounded terrible. Sorry, I had to fix that on my end. Can hear, how are you? How's your day? I'm doing okay. My day is fine. The live went fine. They got rid of the filter I usually use, so I had to compromise and use something else. So I gotta make some new backgrounds over there, but whatever. Oh, goodness. At least we're finally freaking on. This shit was such a pain today. For some reason, the computer was connecting to T's phone, so, like, it was ass, and I'm like, I don't know why it would just randomly connect to their phone, but we figured it out. We got there. It's all good. Okay. We are continuing with more Our Life Beginnings and Always, now that we are finally fucking here. Let's load in. So today will be the reflection moment. Like I said, I don't remember these particular DLC moments. I know at one point I was really dragging my feet because I wanted to still have new stuff for this game. Like, I didn't want to be done with all of it. I also have my water, so that's good. Now that we're actually here. Okay. Now that I got everything all set and we should theoretically be good, I will get us going here in just a second. Make sure I got my chat nice where I can see y'all. Oh yeah, no, I just on TikTok I use a ghost filter for the green screen that doesn't exist anymore. So my backgrounds were all set to one filter and now I'm gonna have to like workshop some new ones. But okie dokie. Hello? Where's my mouse? There we are. Like I said, we're starting with the reflection moment. Let's go. Oh my goodness, we're in Cove's room. Okay. After finishing breakfast at the Holden's house, you and Cove had retreated to his room to relax before starting the day in earnest. Or perhaps you would take it easy for the whole afternoon. Neither of you had plans exactly, so you were free to do whatever came to mind. Ooh, okay. Not doodling pictures in the sand across the floor. You know what? I do personally like Rubik's Cubes. So maybe that. Or just lazing around on the bed. Nah, I want to fiddle with the Rubik's Cube. For every row you locked in the right place, there was at least one that snuck away from where you wanted it to be. Even with your mind elsewhere, you could tell Cove was similarly at ease. He had his chin propped up with one hand as he scrolled through his phone. A burst of laughter broke the silence, hooking your attention and bringing you back to the present. You looked at Cove for an explanation. His eyes, now crinkled with mirth, were still locked on his screen. What's so funny? Are you watching TikToks? He finally looked up at you, smirking. Dad scanned some old photos. You know. He drew a rectangle in the air with the phone freehand. Printed out ones, back from when I was little. He texted it all to me last night, I guess. I've been checking them out. Cassie? I want to see Baby Cove. Cove narrowed his eyes, smile still bent. I was gonna show you. Good. Show me the baby Cove pictures. I just wanted to look at it first to make sure there was nothing super embarrassing. You never know with my dad. He grimaced, envisaging what horrors his dad might unwittingly spring on him. I mean, what if there's a photo of me getting potty trained or something? I get that. That's how my mom was with pictures. You suppressed an empathetic shudder and nodded. I get that. I get that too well, Cove. Cove only cleared his throat nervously, the fear of his dad's well-meaning actions still looming large in his mind. Anyway, before we forget, I was laughing 'cause I came across a Halloween one from when I was 8, the year I went as a zombie, remember? He shook his head, grinning wearily while holding the phone out to you. You walked over and took a seat on the bed next to him to get the full view. Oh my goodness, look at baby zombie Cove. He's so cute. I never even liked zombies. All I wanted was to show off my new scar, and it needed to be something scary. I couldn't be a normal person who had a scar, according to my 8-year-old mind. He's so cute, though. I was a little dork. Absolutely, and now you're a big dork, and we just love the dorkiness no matter what. It's cute as hell. Dad really wanted to be useful, as usual. He came up with the idea of being an undead person. It was pretty good, huh? It was good, but my costume that year was better. You've been very proud of it. Cove chuckled at your reply. I can't believe how much larger my scar used to be. That's fair. Scars are weird. He looked down at his arm, a soft smile on his face, and traced what remained of the jagged line with his fingers just as you'd seen him do countless times before. His voice was playful when he spoke again. Look at how tiny it is now. How am I gonna pretend to be tough without a big scar? Cove, you've never fooled anyone. Derek thought I was tough. That's not helpful. Derek thought you were tough until you opened your mouth. You open your mouth and everybody knows you're soft and squishy. Yeah, thought. That's harsh, Blake. And the truth. You're right. Cove smiled bashfully, pleased with his joke, and ducked his head to look away from you. His fingers were still tracing the scarred patch of skin. I really do like having this, even if it is kind of little these days. His voice was shy, like he was letting you in on a big secret. Yeah, the game does show it. Hold on 1 second. So, he's not facing a good way right now, but this right here on his arm, that is the scar. You can also go back and look at it better in different shots, but yeah, his scar's right there on his arm, and he got it from, I believe he was on a jet ski, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so we don't see how he got it, because when he moved here, he was already in the cast. But yeah. There you go. That's where Cove's scar is. I also love that his shirt and his necklace match. I think that's very, very cute. I also love glasses on him. Cove turned back to face you fully, finally letting go of his scar. He was happy. The mark was a part of him, and clearly held meaning for Cove. Reaching over, you laid a reassuring hand on his arm where the scar was. You cupped his arm with your fingers carefully as your thumb ran down the outline of his scar. Along with the rougher tissue of the scar, you could also feel the goosebumps on his arm. Cove let out a choked breath, a dizzied smile playing out on his face. It was evident that he liked the feeling. You stopped there, bringing your hand to rest on your burning cheeks. They were lifted in a smile that you couldn't quite repress. Your eyes drifted back to the scar on Cove's arm. The scar had been there as long as you'd known Cove, though when you'd first met it had been concealed by that neon pink cast. Want to hear how I managed to go jet skiing when I was 8? Absolutely. Yeah, I want to know the story. What the fuck was an 8-year-old doing on a jet ski? I don't know, just feels like a story. You were initially stunned that he'd guessed what you were thinking, though given the topic of conversation and the direction of your gaze, it was a natural conclusion to reach. Not bothered by your reaction, Cove continued with a shrug. I don't mind telling you. It's nothing special. He rubbed the back of his neck, grinning sheepishly. Mostly it's just really dumb. You nodded. That was something you'd like to hear more about, especially knowing that no lasting harm had come of it. Cove stared into the distance, lips parted as he readied the story in his mind. So me, my dad, and Mom were at a party. I don't know if it was a casual get-together or a specific celebration. I hope it wasn't for something meaningful, considering how I ended it. He winced, then managed a bashful smile. Anyway, my mom and dad were off doing stuff, talking to people, I guess. I was left with the other non-adults. Most of them were older than I was. Maybe all of them were? Okay. His brow furrowed as he tried to recall dusty memories. Then he shrugged again and continued. The older kids were taking turns on the jet skis. There weren't enough for everyone to ride at once, so in between turns they were hanging out on the shore. I was meant to just sit there with them and watch. Remembering when you'd first met Cove, you bet that he hadn't been satisfied with that arrangement. He confirmed that suspicion. I was pretty unhappy. It wasn't a party for me, not when all I could do was look at other people have fun when I couldn't. The teens must have realized that, though I never hid when I was pouting as a kid. Only when you were a kid? Cove bristled with embarrassment. It looked pretty sulky to you. Come on, let me finish the story. Alright. Cove sighed, letting go of the interruption and picking up where he left off. Basically, someone offered to let me ride. I was way too small to drive it myself, but this older kid, they must have been at least 16, said I could sit in front of them while they controlled the jet ski. I knew I wasn't supposed to do anything like that. Still, I figured my parents were doing whatever they wanted, so why couldn't I? I nodded at the person, and I remembered the other teens helping me onto the jet ski, along with the one driving. We sped off into the water. Cove smiled widely and wistfully. It was amazing, at first. My hair was flying everywhere as we zoomed away from the shore. I loved being out on the water like that. Too bad it turned out steering a jet ski with an 8-year-old sat on your lap was harder than a bunch of kids figured it would be. The teen tried their best, but they couldn't keep control for long. We got spun around and went right into the sand. You sucked in a deep breath. The other person wasn't hurt. Thankfully, they held on to the bars and stayed in their seat. I didn't. I was thrown at full speed into a rocky part of the shore near the dock. I must have tried to brace for impact or catch myself, 'cause my arm is what I mostly landed on. He looked down at the limb in question. You could see him visualizing the long-healed injury. It was pretty torn up. After that, it's hazy for me. I got taken to the hospital. I didn't feel a lot of pain when it first happened. Yeah, the adrenaline, that makes sense. All I remember thinking about was how I was covered in sand and the grains were uncomfortable. The sand was uncomfortable? Cove chuckled. I know, right? I did start feeling my arm later. It definitely hurt eventually. The doctor said my arm was broken, along with it being torn open. Ew. That's how I ended up getting my pink cast. He smiled nostalgically. That color. It seemed just nice and happy at the time. It brightened the mood, so I picked it. The smile faded. He finished the story with a sigh, his eyes downcast. I feel bad I did any of that. I hope whoever that teen was, they weren't traumatized by seeing a little kid go flying into the ground. They were just trying to do a nice thing. Cove threw arms out to the side dramatically. I wish I knew who they were so I could give them a call and say I'm still in one piece. But yeah, that's the full story. Yeah, that checks out for Cove. I am so glad you were both okay in the long run. That's the important thing. Cove sighed again, the regret written plainly on his face. It was a failure, that's just the truth. He smiled flatly. But to my credit, I think I've grown a lot since then. Wait. Cove's eyes went completely wide. Suddenly reinvigorated, he seized his phone and tapped away at the screen. What's up? I knew it. You weren't sure that he'd heard you, but he set his phone down and turned to face directly to you. His face was resolute, though the glow of the screen was no longer reflected in his eyes. They seemed to sparkle even brighter than before. Blake, we're adults. We can decide things for ourselves now. You only realized that now? The age requirement to rent a jet ski in California is 18. We could totally do it. You want to break another bone? Cove pouted, his lower lip jutting out, which didn't back up what he said next. I'm not a little kid. You don't have to worry. Within a moment, Cove had recovered and returned to his serious expression from before. I was gonna say, now we know how Cove really got a scar, other than just it was a jet ski. Oh boy. He's determined. I'll be careful, and I really want you to be there when I try again. Please?" His voice was soft and earnest. You could tell how much the request meant to him. You also knew him enough to know that he wasn't going to give up on this idea. Letting him go on his own wasn't an option. "I can't have you running off by yourself. I'll go, without any hospital trips." I'd be interested in trying jet skiing. In theory, it sounds like it could be fun, maybe, possibly. I'm not big on, water stuff. Typically. But, it could be fun? Yeah, I'd be interested in trying jet skiing. Cove perked up at once, a grin stretched wide across his face. He was practically bouncing in place. "Let's go!" Oh boy. Please don't let us end up at the hospital. That's my only goal today. Get Cove home in one piece. You got up and worked as a team to gather everything needed for the trip. Cove's other aquatic hobbies came in handy, and he was quickly kitted out with everything he'd need other than the jet skis themselves. You needed to run back home briefly, having dressed and prepared for a day that didn't involve jet skiing, but soon enough you were both ready and jumping into Cove's car. As you got in, you learned that Cove had used the brief time apart to locate a rental store on his phone. You caught his eye as you clicked your seatbelts into place. Excited, you held out a hand. Cove slapped it in a high five before setting off. You and Cove soon arrived. The ocean was perfectly inviting today. The deep blue of the water glittered under the clear sky, while the tide rolled in and out at its leisure. I'm so excited for this. Oh, look at him in his little suit. I love him. His excitement was adorable, for real. Seeing how pleased you were, Cove grinned at you. "Oh, hey, want to say hi to my dad while we're here? I've already texted my mom about the plan. He's working right now." You remembered how close his shop was. It wouldn't take long, even by walking. "Sure, we can do that." Mr. Holden was a great guy, so you were happy to check in on him. "Thanks. Sorry it might be kinda awkward when he hears why we're here, but it should be alright. I mean, my parents forgave me a long time ago for that amazing stunt. I don't want to be scared off jet skiing for my whole life because of it." You wondered which of you Cove was attempting to reassure. It was only a short walk back down the dock to Mr. Holden's scuba shop. Cove breezed in, as familiar with the store as he was with his own home. The place was quiet, empty aside from a couple of customers quietly browsing, and Cove's dad behind the counter. Mr. Holden looked up, his friendly expression spreading into a grin when he saw who had just entered. "Hi, Blake. Hey, Sport. What brings you all the way out here?" He cast an eye at the way the two of you were dressed. "Judging by how you're decked out, I'm guessing scuba diving? There's plenty here for that. What can I help you with?" Cove chuckled, amused by how quickly his dad seized on a favorite topic. Or maybe it was how his dad always fell over himself trying to be useful. "Hi, Dad. We're not doing that this time. We sort of decided to go rent a couple of jet skis." The phrase jet skis had Mr. Holden's mouth in a taunt line immediately. Oh boy. I don't blame him for being like, that. Jet skis. He echoed the words as his eyes instinctively darted to the scar on Cove's arm. That's when. Mr. Holden started to speak several times, each attempt quickly abandoned. Cove smiled encouragingly, trying not to add to his father's worries. I promise I'll be careful, and Blake will be there too. We always look out for each other. Mr. Holden pinched his face back into an unconvincing smile. All right, you're a whole lot bigger now than you were back then. Heck, you can drive a car and everything. I'm sure you and Blake will have plenty of fun. The worry still echoed out in his voice, barely concealed by the positive words, but Cove was buoyed by his father's support. Yeah, well, we're all set. We only stopped by to say hi and let you know since we were over here. Mr. Holden beamed, obviously moved by his son's simple consideration. Wow, you're so thoughtful. Thanks for taking the time. I love them. These two are so fucking sweet. Dad, you don't need to thank me for that. Mr. Holden simply laughed at his son's response. It'd be great if you could keep me in the loop while you're out there too. Just text me to let me know if it's going well, or anything. He's so nervy. He doesn't want his kiddo getting hurt again. See, I wouldn't be surprised if I could see both of them, but specifically Mr. Holden, I could see kind of blaming himself a little bit when Cove got hurt, in the sense of like him and Kyra were off socializing and talking to people. So I could see him for some amount of time being like, I should have been keeping a better eye on him. That shouldn't have happened. Like, I should have been there. Because he just feels like that kind of parent. Like, he feels like the type to blame himself even though it wasn't his fault. You know what I mean? I will. His dad smiled more easily. Great. Cove rubbed at his arm, causing Mr. Holden's eyes to momentarily twitch back to the childhood injury. We're gonna head out. See you later. Take care. See you, Mr. Holden. Mr. Holden waved you off as you left the store. Yeah, he'd just be the type to be like, I should have been doing better. I should have been there. My kiddo. The pair of you headed back to the docks, walking side by side. After your feet hit the boards, Cove's pace fell. Glancing over, you saw him looking down, out over the water. That wouldn't have been unusual if his expression hadn't been so somber. He wasn't geared up with anticipation or even nervousness, but with an uncharacteristic lethargy. Something was weighing heavy on his mind. Not you're gonna walk right off into the sea if you don't pay attention. That's wild. Cove? Huh? He blinked, startled by you interrupting his rumination. Oh, sorry. He sighed. Though you'd torn his attention away from the ocean, it gradually drifted back to the water. You cleared your throat, unwilling to lose him again. Sorry, again. He put his hands to his face, rubbing his eyes wearily. Here I go thinking everything's resolved with what's happened, and we can have fun. But I can't just enjoy anything. I had to find something else to get stuck in my head. You're having second thoughts about jet skiing? No, that's not it. The ends of his lips were drawn into the beginning of a frown, like gray clouds clustering to signal a coming storm. I figured my dad would be a little worried about me doing it, but what he was saying, it wasn't what I'd expected. He was so sad. It was more than nervous. I think he feels bad, and now I feel bad, but it isn't as if I'm the only one who ever does something stupid or gets hurt. It got me thinking about that whole time. That's when I realized it wasn't long after that accident that my parents separated. Cove, I don't think your jet skiing accident had anything to do with your parents separating, so please don't make a connection there. Please don't try and make a connection there. They're separate things. Stay quiet. Let him get this off his chest. As a kid, I didn't think about the consequences of my actions, or how what I did impacted other people. Like, why should anyone care? I'm the one doing it, not them. Because they care about you, you giant goof. It made no sense, and I still cared when other people did things I didn't like. But I was 8 and mostly just mad that nothing felt like it was in my control. That makes sense. You could tell that he was building up to something, so you nodded for him to continue. I was pretty difficult to deal with because of that attitude, but looking back, I think that's what saved me from something a lot of kids go through. Blaming themselves for their parents' divorce. Okay, good. He falls on the other end of things. We love a healthy boy. It never crossed my mind that anything I did made a difference on my mom and dad's relationship. They would do what they did no matter what. Now, though, I guess it's kind of hard to ignore that thought, huh? No, Cove, don't backpedal. It's good that you weren't blaming yourself. Oh, god damn it. This poor sweet boy. Their situation was already so hard, and I wasn't a good kid, so... Cove, you were absolutely a good kid. He left his words adrift as he looked down, the conclusion unfinished. It was silent between you. Cove, you were 1,000% a good kid. But only for a second. Cove pulled himself up to his full height, his chin held aloft. Whatever he'd decided, he was resolute. I'm going back. I've got to talk to my dad. I'm not gonna let things be like before, where I just feel crappy and refuse to even tell him what's going on. That doesn't work for either of us. Oh my goodness. Go Cove! You can go ahead if you want. I won't mind. I still really want to do this, and I'm sure it'll be okay. I want to stay with you. We always look out for each other, remember? Cove smiled gently, having wanted that deep down. Thanks, let's go. I love him. I just want to squeeze him. You and Cove retook your steps down the docks once more, heading back to Mr. Holden's scuba shop. The customers you'd spotted in there before were now leaving the store, new bags clutched in their hands. You hoped that this would mean Cove could have his conversation without a public audience. This time, Cove strode inside the shop with purpose. Mr. Holden, still at the counter, glanced up to greet whoever had come inside. He grinned as you approached. Hello again. Forget something? Sort of. Cove had reached the counter now. You needed to rush just to keep up with him as he crossed the show floor. Mr. Holden raised an eyebrow, taking in Cove's shift in attitude, and chose his next words with care. Is everything all right? Cove swallowed, not answering initially. Talking openly with his dad was still somewhat new for the son. You knew that he was struggling for the right way to begin. I wanted to ask about what happened. I love Cove too. He's so sweet. Mr. Holden winced as if the words had struck him physically. The accident? No, the divorce. The pained expression fell from Mr. Holden's face. Wide-eyed, his jaw slack, he gaped at Cove. Why? Cove glanced over his shoulder at you. As your eyes met, you saw him draw confidence by having you by his side. He turned back to his father. I want to know the truth. His tone was grave. Did me getting into the accident hurt your marriage? If I hadn't done it, would you and Mom have gotten along better? No. Hell no. Damn, strong fucking reaction from Mr. Holden. Mr. Holden squashed the suggestions with the gravity you'd rarely heard in his voice. Yeah, I definitely haven't played this moment. Shit. You were 8 years old. You're not responsible in any way. Kyra and I should have protected you. I can understand why you're feeling that. What happened was so horrible. How could it not have an impact? It did. It was a reflection of us as parents. The relationship between just your mom and me was separate and already unsalvageable. Cove turned away, his brow still furrowed as he looked at the floor. Maybe I'm being anxious and it's taking over, but it wasn't just then. I always caused problems. He plowed on, unwilling to give up without explaining his worries. What if I'd been easier to raise, or if you'd had me later on? Maybe even if you didn't have me at all, it might have been better for the two of you. Cove, I want to cry for him so bad right now. Not him being like, well, maybe if you didn't have me, your marriage would have been fine. Fuck. Okay, as a child of divorce, this shit's hurting me like a little bit. Cove, please, stop. It's too much. God damn. My poor little ocean dude. Him just want everybody to be okay. Jesus. If I didn't have you, then what good would my life be? Jesus. Mr. Holden didn't let the words hang unchallenged in the air for even a second. He hurried over to Cove, taking his son's arms in his hands. Cove, listen. There's only one person to blame for things not working, and that's me. Cove opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Holden forced on, determined to erase any question in Cove's mind. I'm not saying this to dishonestly push accountability off from someone else or to throw a pity party for myself. You want to know the truth, so that's what I'm giving you. Your father is the reason our family couldn't stay together. You think you caused trouble? You should have seen me at your age. You're such a good kid, I can hardly believe how good you are. Mr. Holden's eyes were misty as he squeezed his son's arms. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, you need to blame yourself for. I'm sorry, Cove, to you and to Kyra. Mom? Yeah, your mom. His pained face eased slightly into a bittersweet smile. Kyra, she was just so smart and driven and completely bursting with life. It was as if she could do anything. You know, there wasn't a single solitary person who didn't want even a piece of her attention, just to catch her eye for a moment. But for some crazy reason, she had a soft spot for my 17-year-old screw-up self. That's when we first met, though it definitely took some time before I managed to ask her out on a date. Not us getting, Cliff and Kyra background. Wait, I love this. They're so fucking cute. Damn. Mr. Holden shook his head, a smile melting as his recollection became solemn once more. And then we'd only been officially together for about 6 months when we found out we were having a baby. I was so worried, so scared, but she was so brave. She was my rock, but we both knew the road ahead was going to be rockier. When we got married, I didn't see it as a dream come true. I wasn't about to start living my life in the only way I could I gotta restart that sentence, fuck. Where did my brain go? When we got married, I didn't see it as a dream come true. I wasn't about to start living my life in the only way I could imagine doing so. I thought what happened, happened, and throwing my cards in with a girl like her was worth the risk. He grimaced, the sentence sour in his mouth, regretting his past perspective. I'd been taking care of myself on my own and getting by. Then all of a sudden I was going to have a wife and a child. So I thought, alright, I'd better step things up and take care of all of us. And that's what I did, sort of. He rolled his eyes. I made money, kept a roof over our heads, and put food on the table. But I was always busy, focused on taking care of things, that I didn't stop to consider what anyone else was thinking or what they actually needed. I made every decision about what I did, and as a result, what happened to the family, by myself, never asking what your mom felt or even wondering if she might have an opinion. Oh boy. I'm seeing where they had problems. I'd tell Kyra about the great place I'd found and how we'd be moving there in the same breath. Or that I'd spent all our savings and taken out a loan to start this business where we're standing in, and even more nonsense. Anything I felt I needed to do, I did. So she just got no input on anything. Fuck. Kyra couldn't even ask where I'd been all day without me rolling my eyes like she was being a nag. I was making sure we didn't starve. Obviously, right? Couldn't she trust me? Not when you're randomly saying, hey, we're moving, hey, I spent all our money and I'm taking out a loan for a business. You didn't exactly give her a lot to trust, my guy. Yikes. He sighed, his head hung low. She went to school part-time while raising you, really knuckling down, but that didn't matter to me back then. She could have spent her days lying in bed, not dying, and I would have felt the same. I didn't care. I was going to get it all done on my own either way. It's so stupid. I admired her more than anyone when there was nothing at stake. Yet as soon as responsibilities were involved, I couldn't let myself rely on her. He combed a hand through his hair, searching for an understanding of his own younger self. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I had something to prove. Maybe I'm the one who didn't trust her in the end. Poor Kyra. She had to spend every day mentally weighing the pros and cons of putting up with my horrible ideas for the sake of peace or trying to explain to my blockheaded self what I was doing wrong. It must have been so stressful and frustrating, constantly having to let everything go because I was stubborn and absolutely would make a fight out of it. He snorted bitterly. I was definitely stuck in my head a lot those days. Our relationship at that point was made of arguments and cool tolerance, but I still genuinely didn't see the divorce coming. We'd made it through the first few years, and after that I never really considered it ending. It was just how life was. In retrospect, it's clear Kyra kept thinking on it more every year, especially because she managed to finish her journalism degree, and with us being more stable, financially that is. She thought of everything. She even timed it right when your school ended for the year, so the process would hopefully be all settled before you had to worry about class again. We were already talking about it before the accident ever happened. I know I took it really hard, being a sad sack all around the neighborhood, but even that is unfair of me. When it shook out, I'm the one who got everything. Kyra didn't want to leave you, Cove. She never would have. I'm certain she felt like she had no choice but to end the relationship. The business was doing really well by then, so I had an easier time making a living. She was between jobs, and when she did get a new job, it meant that she'd be traveling all the time. That's why she willingly accepted me having full custody. She didn't get to be there with her child for so many moments, and you had to spend half of your life growing up without your mother, and it's my fault. Mr. Holden closed his eyes briefly as he took in a breath. So that's it, the story of Cliff and Kyra's marriage. Not exactly a fairy tale, but I want to be clear. You saw his grip on Cove's arms tighten. No matter what happened with me and her, I'd never ever want to miss out on being your dad. Cove's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His eyes glistened, glossy with tears that had yet to fall. He blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. Thank you for telling me. His voice was hoarse, little more than a whisper. Mr. Holden brought a hand up to his face and lightly nudged Cove's chin. You're welcome. You're a grown-up now, right? You deserve the truth. That's the least I can do for you. Cove managed a fragile smile. Thank you for taking care of me, for all of it. Mr. Holden brushed the compliment off with a wave of his hand. It was nothing. Look at where we ended up. I've got this whole entire store, a house, friends here, a very thoughtful son. It's all good for me. I'm glad. His voice was still quiet, and he ducked his head shyly after saying the words. Mr. Holden patted him on the back. You could see the tears in Cove's eyes, still shining, threatening to spill over. Yeah, how dare they make this shit so sad and sweet at the same time? I do like that Cliff refused. Like, the second he heard Cove trying to blame himself in any way, shape, or form, he went, no, hell no, absolutely not. He shut that shit down so fast, he refused to have his son think that any of it was his fault. And I love him for that. We also love him owning up to how he was back then and shit being his fault. Like, we love an accountable king here, I'm sorry, but the accountability is fucking everything. Hey Goldfish, how you doing? Mr. Holden put an arm around his shoulders, gently steering him towards the door. You should go have fun. Make some nice memories. Cove's gaze flicked over to you. The watery smile on his face solidified. All right. Good. Now out you go. Mr. Holden nudged the two of you out of the shop. You both walked silently as you made your return to the docks. Cove's face was pensive, clearly still digesting everything his dad said. He finally sighed, catching your attention. He hesitantly reached for the bag he had brought and raised it up. Blake, I want to call my mom. Okay. I'm not going to leave her out of things, and I want to know what she thinks about what happened and all of that. He fiddled with the straps of his bag. It still remained closed shut. It's not like I don't trust Dad. It's just Mom's thoughts are important too. I get it, Cove. There are two sides to every story after all. He seemed relieved that you understood. You knew he didn't want to be a bother with another delay. Thanks. Then I guess there's no time like the present. Time to ask. With that mini pep talk, he finally opened his bag and found his phone. Cove unlocked it quickly and tapped over to his favorite contacts. He called up his mom and put the phone on speaker as it dialed. You'd be so good at reading chapter books and posting the video on YouTube. That way you read is so relaxing. Thank you, I appreciate that. I actually have been very open with this whole game about the fact that I do struggle with reading out loud. Like, my brain kind of jumps around the whole thing. So I have to be, like, really focused in on what I'm doing. But you know what? Maybe that's something I'll consider. I already post these over on YouTube, and I do like having the chance to read out loud. I think it's definitely helping me be a little bit more aware of my stuff. But thank you, I appreciate that y'all think it's relaxing. Definitely something I'll consider. I don't know. But I also make the joke all the time. I'm like, I don't know how to read. I just have a lot of words memorized because that's what it feels like. Whenever I get to a word that I don't recognize spelled out like that, my brain goes, oh no. But I give it a go, and if I'm wrong, then I get corrected later, and I try to do better going forward. That's the best I can really be doing. Thank you, friends. I appreciate you. Kyra must have had her phone close because she answered almost immediately. Cove, this is a pleasant surprise. I thought you'd be getting back to me later. Hey, Mom. He paused for a second and then looked at you. You're on speakerphone with Blake, too. Hey, Kyra. Oh, hello. I'm popular today. I love his mama. Aw, I love that baby goldfish is falling asleep while I read the story. That's so sweet. Well, what's going on? Don't keep me in suspense. Are you a pro jet skier already? I love Kyra. Cove chuckled and scratched the back of his head. We haven't started yet. Actually, there's something I kind of want to ask you about. Really? I'm intrigued. Her voice was bright and excited. Cove moved the phone closer to his face so he could speak softly, aware that the tone of this conversation was about to change. I was talking to Dad earlier. It was about your relationship and why you both divorced. Ah. That one syllable had lost all her earlier energy. Cove tightened his grip on his phone. It does make sense that the past would come up today. Yeah, but... He tried to brighten up the mood again. You weren't used to him being the perky one of the two. You could only imagine it felt like a strange role reversal for him. Dad said you were really amazing. He admired you a lot. What a flatterer. I love these two. She sighed wistfully, and you could hear some interference. Maybe she had shaken her head. You couldn't tell for sure. Oh, Cliff. He bungled himself through regular everyday adulting and social situations in astoundingly charming ways. Yet, somehow at the exact same time, he was an ambitious, slightly shady, under-the-table type of man when it came to making his living in the world. So, essentially, your father was an absolute heartthrob for someone such as myself. Oh boy, baby goldfish. I do like hearing about Cliff and Kyra's, past. Cove and Kyra laughed delicately. The tension was broken into something lighter, more familiar between the two. It's cool you both have nice things to say about each other. I love that about these two. I think it's so important that they still have nice things to say, because I feel like so many times when parents divorce, they just badmouth each other to the kid and make everything awkward and just sad. So I'm with Cove here. It really is cool they both have nice things to say about each other. I think that's so important. I agree, baby. She took a moment before continuing carefully. Do you have questions about what happened? I'm not sure. Cove squinted at the phone in his hand as he tried to think, his free hand brushing through his hair. I just kind of wanted to know how you'd describe what it was like. Could I tell you what Dad said about it? I don't think Cliff would mind. Whatever he told you is probably what he'd say to me. All right, go for it. After taking a breath, Cove recapped Cliff's experience, doing his best to follow his dad's story. He went into a surprising amount of detail, and not a single thing was missed. Kyra listened on in absolute silence, letting her son speak without interruption. When Cove finished, he took another deep inhale of air. So, what do you think? Kyra sighed softly. You heard a clanking noise like she was drumming her nails on the back of her phone or on a countertop. That definitely sounds like Clifford. It's not exactly wrong, but he doesn't have a total picture. He puts the emphasis on the wrong places, I think. What do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean? I want to know. For starters, Cliff unsurprisingly downplayed himself more than he had to. He did? Cove's eyebrows raised, and his face continued to inch even closer to the screen. Well, since your dad was so praising of me, it's only fair to return the favor. When Cliff said he was already taking care of himself when he met me, he means he was on his own. Cliff's own parents weren't, and still aren't, friendly people. They've always had a combative relationship, though him getting into drinking and gambling as a teenager certainly didn't help. He knew they'd kick him out at 18, so he saved them the trouble and left home at 17. He always found a way to make it work, even without support. I met him a few months after that. We hit it off right away. He was exactly what I wanted back then. We dated, and then about half a year later, bam! You were on the way, Cove. She laughed fondly as Cove clung to every word. I was really optimistic about it all. I couldn't wait to be a mother, and I was more than happy that Cliff was the father who'd be along for the ride. We got married quick, before you were born. Cliff's recollection of our wedded dynamic is pretty spot on. He was extremely stubborn and just, well, immature. Highly, highly immature. Her voice raised slightly, and you got the feeling that she was thinking back to her memories living with him. She left the specifics unspoken. But it's not like I was grown up either. Everyone, except maybe Cliff, could see our relationship was no good, or at least not good enough yet to commit to. I knew, but I didn't want to give it up. I wanted to keep the family together. I thought that if we divorced or were never together, then we'd ruin your life, Cove. Obviously, that wasn't true. I just didn't have enough experience at the time to realize there wasn't only one option for us. Maybe things would have been easier on you if we had split when you were still a baby, but it took me years to start figuring it all out. Cove nodded, even if his mom couldn't see it, thinking hard about something. He was likely remembering his own experiences back then. We were married, but never seriously loved each other. We hardly knew each other. I don't mind that Cliff never viewed marrying me as some kind of dream come true. I honestly just appreciate that he tried giving my hastily made life plan a shot. I was the one who proposed after all, got down on one knee and everything. She huffed slightly, something between a chuckle and a sigh. It's very funny, and a little sad, that Cliff still doesn't know why things changed between us. It's obvious to me, and I'd guess he does know deep down. He just never consciously made the connection. I'm not even mad he didn't stay the same towards me. Love makes everything different. But you said... I know what I said. She interrupted Cove before Cove could even finish his blurted out interjection. I don't mean Cliff and I. We were just two kids in a relationship that only ever worked when it was at its easiest. And then you were born, little Cove James Holden. I loved you immediately, and so did your father. Cove was stunned. His eyes started watering as his mouth clamped shut. The inclination we had towards each other paled in the face of that. Our love to you was the real deal. Cliff was the proudest papa. Then in true Cove fashion, tears began to fall. He stayed silent, but you were pretty sure Kyra knew the effect her words had on her son. No matter how much time passed, Cliff never got over how amazing it was that such a precious little boy was his. I should have taken pictures of how he'd puff up whenever someone referred to you as his son. She sounded much cheerier now. A slight smile crept on Cove's face despite his tears. Then again, he still does that now. It wasn't hard to imagine Mr. Holden lighting up around baby Cove the same way he did with 18-year-old Cove. I remember how, when a real argument started brewing, Cliff had a habit of walking away to cool off. He wasn't able to handle it. His son seems to have taken after him in that way. You heard her chuckle, and Cove looked down, a blush clear on his cheeks. You could just feel her smirk through the phone. She breezed over the next section airily. For our whole relationship, he always ended fights by skipping out on me for who knew how long. I don't think even Cliff knew when he'd come back. That stopped when you were born. Cliff stopped running. He was still gone a lot for work, and we still had fights, but he wouldn't leave. Instead, he'd go to your room, Cove. If you were asleep, he'd just sulk on the ground by your crib until you woke up. Sometimes he'd pace the room while holding you, or sit on the floor and rock you. He'd stay with you until one of us decided we were ready to talk again. We didn't have a lot of furniture back then. That's part of the reason why Cliff was always hanging out on the floor. He really came to embrace it. When our relationship got bad enough that we didn't want to share a bed anymore, he always made sure I got to have the mattress. He instead set up a spot in the corner of the nursery just in case you needed anything through the night. Stop, I love him. Welcome back, Goldfish. This is just making me love Cliff more, honestly. He gave you a more private space when you got bigger, but he still always made sure he could be there for you. There's still no denying, whether Cliff understands or not, he made his choices without prioritizing me, but it wasn't that he suddenly hated me. To Cliff, I was only a wife on paper. In his mind, I was a cool girl he had dated and generally liked, nothing close to being the light of his life. All his blood, sweat, and tears weren't for himself or me or even the family unit. They were all completely and totally for his baby. Meanwhile, I was doing the same, though in the opposite way. I did take us being married seriously. I was trying to force us together as a couple so we would be a complete family for our child. You felt like a fly on the wall of a very personal conversation. Cove didn't seem to notice that when you looked over at him, his face a complicated patchwork of emotions. Eventually, I woke up and saw what I was doing. I realized it wasn't going to work, not like that. When I was ready for it, I talked to Cliff about separating and starting up the divorce process. He was shocked by it, and unfortunately, it wasn't too long after that you had your accident, Cove. Blake, I don't know how much Cove really told you about it, but when he broke his arm, it terrified all of us. Cove could have died. Even back then, we knew he'd likely have a permanent scar he'd have to live with forever. Our parenting hurt our child, and he was the one who'd have to carry the repercussions. You were a bit taken aback to be referred to directly. You still felt a little out of place, and she had seemed completely focused on her son. Cove grimaced, and the hand holding his phone shook. Mom. Kyra continued as if she'd never paused. It was heartbreaking, and then on top of it all, we had to put you through your parents breaking up. Taking that back wasn't an option, despite the timing. It felt like everything we had worked so hard for, to make you happy, was for nothing. I chose to believe we'd fix our lives from there, but to Cliff it seemed hopeless. He failed his son. It was easier for me in some ways. I had my family to lean on. That made it feel less daunting, less impossible. Cliff had only ever really known being on his own, by the happenstance of his birth and then by choice. When we broke up, he knew he was going to have to put back the pieces of what was left alone. I wanted to be there for him, even after everything, but I was the one divorcing him. It was impossible. I never managed to be someone he truly relied on, and I had to remember that wasn't changing. As bleak as it felt at the time, Cliff still tried not to let any of that show to you, Cove. He did what he could to keep your spirits high about the move, your new house, the scar, everything. So that's why. Cove trailed off. He had misunderstood the impact his injury had on his parents. You were reminded of something that made more sense now. Mr. Holden had been so helpful with Cove's old Halloween costume because he didn't want Cove to be saddened by the scar. It was clear Cove was coming to the same realizations. Now with that all said, if Cliff was a completely perfect and wonderful guy, I wouldn't have left him. If it was even pretty good, I would have stayed. It was hard not to have custody. Sometimes I felt like I was a fun aunt rather than the mom I always wanted to be. I might have overcompensated a little at times because of that. She forced a laugh, but it had an uncomfortable edge to it. You could tell she was trying to blow off a very real anxiety of hers. Cove looked ready to say something, but his mom kept talking, kept moving forward. Still, it's not Cliff's fault alone that our relationship didn't work. We were always better as co-parents than spouses, but I knew when separating that it wasn't going to be even. And Cove, the only reason I could stand not being there for you all the time is because I knew that if the situation was reversed and I could have provided a more stable environment, Cliff would have done the same. Your dad would give up his house, his shop, even his right arm if it would guarantee that you were safe and happy. So, as painful as it was, I was sure that you'd be okay because you were still with someone who loved you more than anything else in the world. Tell me why I want to cry at this. Like, fuck, this moment's hitting me like a bus, y'all. Cove lowered his head, tears falling to the ground. He tried to speak. It took him a few tries. "Thank you for telling me." His voice cracked, and Kyra made an alarmed sound on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to make you cry." "It's okay. If we're being honest, everything makes Cove cry, so you're good, Kyra. Don't worry about it." He was still crying, everyone could tell, being physically present or not. "I love you, Mom. You've always been my mom, not some aunt, my mom." "I love you too." Her tone was thick with emotion. She was at the edge of a voice break herself. "I'm so lucky to be your mom." She started to sniffle openly. "Don't feel bad for me with how it worked out. I promise that none of it was your fault, and it's not as though I'm completely miserable over here. I have an incredible life with a beautiful baby boy of my own who calls whenever he can." At that, Cove's tears only came down heavier. "Thank you." Kyra sighed affectionately, and you could hear the warmth in her voice. "I think that's good for now. Maybe we should end the call. Take a moment." "Is that really all right?" He tightened his grip on his phone. You could see how emotionally exhausted he looked. "Of course. We'll be in touch soon. For now, you'll only be able to keep thanking me or apologizing." "Hey." Cove cried out defensively over the accusation, making his mom snicker. "Bye, and goodbye to you, Blake. I'm glad you're there for my baby." "See you." "Bye, Mom. I love you." "Love you too." Cove hung up. He let his hand drop to his side, his phone brushing the fabric of his wetsuit. His other hand went up to his face. He tried to wipe the tears from his eyes. I also feel like crying. Some love talking their relationship together. Genuinely, I adore Cliff and Kyra because you can tell how deeply they both care about Cove. If anybody has to do the co-parenting thing, I'm glad it's them. His face was red, and he struggled to put his phone back in his bag one-handed. You could tell he was getting worked up. He finally just used both of his hands and sealed his phone back into its normal place. Cove sniffed and then reached out for you. His hand trembled in your grasp and you squeezed back. He needed to feel your support. "You want to go see your dad again?" He didn't have to tell you what was on his mind for this. Cove nodded his head weakly. You rushed back the way you came, feet pounding across the boards of the dock to return to the scuba shop for the third time. It was a little difficult to keep up with him. His stride was already longer than yours, but with him almost running, you had to pick up the pace. You reached his dad's store, and Cove still wasn't slowing down. He pushed his way through the door at full speed. His hand released yours as he charged in. Mr. Holden had been walking around the middle of the store checking over things. Immediately, he turned at the sound. "What? Where's the fire?" He froze when he got a look at Cove's face. He worriedly opened his mouth, probably to ask what was wrong, but then Cove launched himself at his father. Cove threw his arms around Mr. Holden's neck. He buried his face in his dad's shoulder and started to sob with deep, hitching breaths. Cliff clearly had no idea what was going on, and his hands hovered awkwardly in the air. He looked at you for a brief second, hoping for understanding, before turning all his attention on Cove. He wrapped both his arms around Cove's back. Cove looked secure in his father's embrace, protected and safe. It's okay. It'll be okay. Whatever it is, it's going to be okay. Cove kept crying. He inhaled deeply, his voice choking up when he tried to speak. You always tried to be there for me when I was growing up. And I was mean to you. I'm sorry. What? Mr. Holden was completely taken aback. He hadn't expected this to be the issue. You don't have to apologize for that, Bud. Kids are allowed to be mad at their parents. It's my job to take care of you. I really didn't do anything special. Cove shook his head as emphatically as he could while still tucked against his dad. You've always supported me no matter what. You've always loved me. I wish I realized how much you did sooner. Cove squeezed him tighter. Thank you. I love you, Dad. At his son's heartfelt confession, the father became choked up as well. He compressed Cove into a crushing hug. I do love you. I always will. You can count on that. I want to be there for you too. They clung onto one another, absorbed in the moment. Then, after a little while longer, they slowly began to loosen their hold. Cove sniffled and moved so he could use his palm to wipe away his tears. His dad's shirt was visibly damp where his face had been. Cliff patted the top of Cove's shoulders. He looked at his son with pride. You've grown up so much. Cove started to laugh through his tears, a wavering smile on his lips. You doubted that Cove would have ever thought that crying on his dad's shoulder was a sign of maturity, but it was true. Cove had changed over the years. You were glad to see Cove grow, 1,000%. Cove used to cry a lot over his parents, and he still did. Despite the similarity, the defining Coveness, there was a big difference between the two occasions. You were proud of him. Cove wiped at his eyes again. You're a good dad. You're a good son. Mr. Holden was plainly touched by the words and beamed at his beloved child. Cove looked away and shyly traced his scar. Cliff chuckled and released Cove to rub the back of his neck. The earlier panic had bled off and left the confusion. I'm glad we had this talk, but what was it that made you cry in the first place? You weren't too bad off when you left before. Oh. Cove ducked his head further down, getting a very good look at the scuff marks on the floor. I called Mom. I wanted to talk to her about all of this. Bye, Goldfish. I'll see you around later. Good luck with baby Goldfish. He kicked one of his feet shyly, swinging it back and forth against the ground. Things felt really hard when I was younger, but it wasn't just me going through stuff, Dad. You never give yourself credit. Cliff smiled gently and gripped Cove's shoulder with reassurance. Kyra is an amazing person to come to my defense. For me, the only hard part was seeing you and her unhappy. Everything else, that was nothing. He wrapped an arm around Cove's neck for another side hug. Cove leaned into the embrace and glanced up at his dad. Your old man is tougher than he looks. Check out how powerful these arms are. And this is 10 years on. I was in my prime those days. Cove laughed. It was a light sound full of fondness. Okay. He quieted down a little, finding a quick moment of seriousness. Thanks again, Dad. I know you don't want me to feel bad, and I'm happy. Because of everything you and Mom did, I have a really nice life. Mr. Holden's countenance became much more serious. He didn't take what was said lightly. Cove, you are very welcome. That's so good to hear. Then he let Cove go again. This time they both took a step back to their normal proximity. Mr. Holden cleared his throat. He looked at you right in the eyes. I also appreciate that you were here for support, Blake. What a true friend. Cove looked back down, embarrassed. I'm glad I could be here. 1,000% fucking. When Cove stopped staring at the floor, you smiled at him. Cliff smiled warmly. He nudged Cove gently as if to say, look how lucky you are. All right. Cove exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing. We better get going. You still have work, Dad, and I think Blake has been patient enough. Cliff grinned and waved the two of you off. Sure thing. I'm happy you both stopped in, but you gotta go have some fun. Be careful out there. I don't need to go jet skiing anymore. Blake, if you still want to go, I don't mind watching. No way. You are a mature young man, and if you want to jet ski, then you should go out and jet ski. I'll still be here if you need anything, right? Yeah, okay. Bye! Cove waved to his dad as he started walking out. You followed. When you turned back to Mr. Holden before you went out the door, he was waving. Bye, kids. You'll do great. Once again, as had become today's habit, you and Cove walked down the dock side by side. But this time, Cove had a bounce back in his step. His smile was soft but radiant. Thanks for staying, and sorry for how long it took. You're welcome. It wasn't a problem to be there for him. Cove grinned at you, all grateful positivity and sunshine. The water lapped at the dock beneath your feet. Cove looked down when a particularly strong wave crashed against it. It's weird to think about my parents' relationship. There's all this stuff that I don't know because I wasn't there, or because I was just a kid, or because I didn't even exist yet. It feels really complicated. It is really complicated. You're not wrong, Cove. Yeah, relationships are complicated. You agreed with him. Connections to other people were as varied as there were waves in the ocean. Cove nodded without elaboration. He looked out into the ocean wistfully for a moment before he shook it off. I'm happy they were married, even if they didn't stay together in the end. I'm glad you're feeling better. I am curious. You asked about what he thought about marriage for himself now. Speaking of marriage, Cove's eyes widened curiously as he turned to face you. Are you scared of it because of everything that happened with your parents? Cove shook his head shyly. He didn't hesitate for a second. No, Surprisingly, I don't have issues about the idea of getting married someday. You looked at him, not bothering to hide your intrigue. He chuckled self-consciously at the reaction he got. I mean, don't get me wrong, trying to actually propose would be terrifying. I'm sure planning a whole wedding would be so hard, especially for me, but just the thought of having someone I loved that I was married to, that I'd spend the rest of my life with, that doesn't scare me. What about you? Would you ever want to be officially married someday? Given the fact that I am actually married, you know what? I like the I'd only get married if I found someone really special, because that's accurate as fuck. The only wedding you could picture was with the perfect partner, someone you loved dearly. You'd never get married just to be married. If you were going to get married, it would be to someone that you truly cherished. Oh. He quickly decided to change the subject after that admission. Alright, no more distractions. Let's go, it's time to jet ski. Yeah, let's do it. The two of you began to more quickly make your way across the boards. Despite your excitement, you were both careful. Neither of you wanted an accident, especially after what happened with Cove's first jet skiing trip. You finally got to the rental place. You were surprised at how easy the process was. It took no time at all for Cove to climb on his jet ski with shaky legs. Go with it. You rented your own jet ski. You'd spent this entire time wanting to jet ski and were thrilled to finally climb onto one. It was lime green with blue detailing. The jet ski rocked slightly as you got on, bobbing with the waves. You looked across to Cove. He sat motionlessly astride his jet ski, preparing himself to start it up. Even from your distance, you could tell his hands were clamped onto the handles too tightly. He was stiff and nervous. Go on, Cove, you can do it. You cheered him on and clapped wildly. His body language relaxed slightly, and he turned his head to look at you. Thanks. He inhaled slowly and started up the jet ski. It roared forward, and you were surprised you could hear him squeak over the sound of the engine. He stopped after a few seconds and breathed again. After he calmed down, he started it up once more. Cove sputtered and stalled with it for a while, going a little further each time. He grew more comfortable with the feel. He continued to struggle with the jet ski, but he refused to let that stop him. He kept going until he wrangled the machine into submission. Cove eventually reached the point where he only stopped the jet ski when he had something to say. He kept shouting things at you. This is amazing! Did you see that, Blake? This is so great! You had gotten your own jet ski going as well. You made sure to keep a safe distance. Cove watched what you did with enthusiasm. Nice turn! He zoomed forward, and you could hear his bright laugh ring across the waves. You cheered for him again, whooping whenever he did something fun. I think you were nervous about jet skiing, but maybe not that bad at it? Knowing that jet skis could be dangerous, you kept a healthy caution over the vehicle. It was tricky at the start. You drove it short bursts, since each time you made it go forward, it seemed much too fast. You worried that you were going to fly off or the jet ski would flip over. However, it didn't take you long to realize you had decent control over the vehicle. You grew more comfortable with the controls and let yourself relax a little. Eventually, the sun set and you had to pack up. Cove was thankfully still in one piece, no cast necessary. After everything had returned, Cove dug his phone out of his bag and texted his parents to let them know all about his triumph. An idea to take a photo to mark the occasion struck Cove, and he wanted you to join him in the selfie. Silly pose. Cove snickered when you got into position. He hesitated for a moment before trying his own funny face. He showed you the picture and it made you smile. It would be a nice memory. His phone vibrated after only a moment after texting it out. Mr. Holden and Kyra had likely been waiting the entire day to find out how this outing would go. And with the news of his success, both of Cove's parents sent back how proud they were of Cove for how far he'd come. Watching him grinning in the setting sun after facing so many fears that day, you felt the same. That was one of the sweetest fucking moments I've ever witnessed in my life. Genuinely, I'm probably gonna go sob. If I'm being so honest, I think I'm gonna go cry for my dude real quick. Yes, overwrite the save. I'm very careful with that now. Yeah, that was honestly a really good and a really important moment. I think early on I thought it was just going to be, oh, we're jet skiing and goofing around having fun and it'd be like a silly fun moment. And then everything with his parents came out. And not me, a child of divorce, almost crying for the fictional child of divorce, because a lot of that shit just hit home, like really fucking hard. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Just so you know, my plan as of right now. Thank you, I appreciate all the kind words. I'm glad you enjoyed it too. Just so everybody knows, the plan is to be on the same time tomorrow, and tomorrow we will be doing late shift. So we are getting there. It's really sad and weird to think about the fact that these are our last 4 Cove Holden moments. Then we get Baxter, and then we get everybody's endings and Cove's wedding. But yeah, I think that is a really good point to wrap up on. I hope y'all enjoyed. As always, consider checking out this wonderful fucking game if you can. I highly recommend it. Even though I'm playing it on stream, you can always make different choices than what I made. Like, there are so many fucking options with this game. I imagine if I had left Cove alone, the moment probably would have been over a little bit sooner, because we wouldn't have seen the conversation with his dad. But I'm so glad we did. I'm really happy we were there for him. But I do hope y'all enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. And with any luck, as long as the stars align and my Wi-Fi isn't ass, I will see y'all tomorrow. On that note, as always, take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. It's hard being a person. You're doing the best you can. I am proud of you. And don't forget to live a life that pisses off a bigot. Bye, y'all.